I'm combining this carbon steel flat bar with some pure nickel powder, and with a little heat, hammering, twisting, grinding, sanding, and filing, and a little cocobolo, I'm turning it into a one-of-a-kind twist Damascus hunting knife. All right, so let's make a knife. I got my 1084 15N20 flat bar, a little rusty, so I'm just cleaning it up on a belt grinder. And I got my, I think it's 1¼ inch square tube ready to go for my canister. So I'm just cutting the 1084 and 15N20 pieces to length to fit in the canister. And so my idea for this knife was to have a twist Damascus knife, but not traditional twist Damascus. So you can see I left a void in the center of the canister. I did put a piece of W1 round bar, but then I also put in some powdered pure nickel, as well as some 1080 with 2% nickel powder on the end cap there. So I wanted this pattern to come out and look like twist Damascus on the spine and the edge, but not along the center of the blade. So that's the idea behind it. So got my canister all welded up, handle put on in the forge. I'm just forge welding it. 5 or 6 heats, typically what it takes me to get that forge welded together. And for whatever reason, I always revert back to the hacksaw to cut that can off, and 9 times out of 10, it doesn't stick. I use some white paint on the inside of the canister. This time was not one of the 9 out of 10, and it actually stuck on the top section there. So I had to grind that little bit off to get the can off. And it wasn't too bad, just a couple minutes on the belt grinder, and I was able to sand through that and get that off. I've had worse. Got it all welded up with a new handle back in the forge and started drawing it out again, and I really was just trying to get it to somewhere close to a 1 inch by 1 inch square. I knocked in the corners, not a lot, just kind of took the sharp edge off the corner before I twisted it. So if you've ever twisted a 1 inch by 1 inch steel bar, it's not super hard, but it's not super easy. You got to put a little force into it, and with not a huge billet like that, it tends to cool off rather quickly. So I ended up, doing, 5 or 6 heats, and I probably get about maybe 1 full twist, maybe 1¼ each time, that for each heat. And I wasn't shooting for a real fine twist pattern, more of a low layer twist pattern, because I just really wanted to be able to see some sort of design around the edge and the spine of the blade. And since the center was going to be nickel with that W1, there's not much of a pattern through the center of the blade. So I went ahead and drew it out, forged it down to try and get a decent length, and I did go ahead and forge in the tang. I didn't forge the tip on it, however. At the time, I wanted to just be able to do a quick etch on the pattern and see what it looked like, so I could see where I wanted my edge to be. Got it all forged out, and it's still pretty thick at this point. It's, probably 3/8 of an inch or so. Cut the handle off on my little portable bandsaw, and immediately went to do normalization and annealing steps before I did any kind of grinding at all. And I've got an old 36, worn 36 belt, just to take a bit of that scale off, that forged scale, before I start on the surface grinder with a fresh new belt. So I'm just getting a flat surface on both sides, getting rid of all the forge marks. You can see there after coming off that surface grinder, it's right at 1/4 of an inch thick. Just trying to get down to some good steel. And then just did a quick little etch with some ferric chloride to see the pattern. And if you look at that pattern, that looks like more of a traditional twist Damascus. But the geometry changes as you go into the depth of the blade because of the way I made the canister. So I had flat bar all around 4 edges of the canister, but in the center I had my powder and my round bar. So that means in the center of that blade, it's not going to look like it does around the edges. When I grind into it, you'll be able to see the pattern more. When I saw what I had to work with, I drew out what I wanted for my knife, did the profiling on it, and cleaned up those shoulders with my little file guide there. Tried to knock most of the sharp edges off and get 90% of the profiling done before I went in to do the heat treat. So hardening the blade in Parks 50, quench oil. Did a dual temper. I didn't get that. I didn't film that, but I did because it's kind of boring watching a knife sit in the oven. But I did do a dual temper on it. And then I went ahead and started doing the grinding on the bevels. Final dimensions on this knife, it's about 15 1/1000ths, just behind the edge. 0.17 inch thickness on the spine. So get all my surfaces flat on the ricasso and along the spine, and then just finishing up on the higher grit belt. You can start to see that nickel coming through at this point. It hasn't been etched, obviously, so you can't really see the difference between the 1084 and the 15 and 20, but you can see the nickel coming through, the pure nickel. I got the bevels ground in and softening up the tang with the torch. And I went to the hand sanding. You can see that nickel a little bit better there. And I think I sanded up to about 1,000 grit. Got all the scratches out and got it looking fairly decent at 1,000 grit. Etched my maker's mark in there with my DC power supply, salt water, and a cotton ball. Cleaned that up a little bit, and then I went in for the etch with the ferric chloride. Probably did a total of 4 or 5, say 1 minute etches in the ferric chloride. Each etch consecutively followed by sanding with higher grit sandpaper, so 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. And then it was on to making the guard. That's a piece of 416, 3/4 inch round bar that I had heated up in the forge, flattened it out into a semi-rectangular shape, and just measured that out, cut the end off, cleaned it all up on the belt grinder, and measured out and drilled the holes for my slot. It's actually the first time I ever used stainless steel for a guard. And most of my knives in the past have been brass for the guard. And I always thought, because brass was softer, that it'd probably be easier to file. The guards I've made with some carbon steels and even the stainless steel, it's actually, for me, a little bit easier because the brass tends to plug up the file because it's so soft. And you have to keep cleaning the file off to get it to work. Whereas the carbon steel and the stainless steel, they don't really do that. So in my experience, that file's easier. I put a couple of G10 spacers in there, 2 black and 1 red, right behind the guard, and then a block of Cocobolo for the handle. So measured out where the tang was going to be, got it marked out so I could drill my hole in the handle. Did that all in the drill press. A little bit of adjustment to do. I don't think I got that on tape, and I just used a little jigsaw file. A jigsaw blade to get in there and clean that slot out a little bit for the tang to fit into. I'm just shaping the guard, or rough shaping on the guard, and I marked out where I wanted my pinhole to be and drilled through the first side of the wood so it would mark the tang, and then I used it's actually 3 or 4 size larger bit to drill the hole in the tang so it would fit up. I got all that done, and it was time to do the glue up. I used JB Weld for the guard. I used West System epoxy for the rest of the handle. Got it all glued up and let it dry overnight in the vise. So it's next day, taking the knife out of the vise, the epoxy's all cured, and it's time to start finishing up the handle. First thing I did is, I actually didn't get that on film either, but I marked out my handle so I could get a flat parallel edge with the ricasso. Then I went to the belt grinder and grinded both sides of the handle flat. Then I marked out profile for my knife. There was a inch or so more chunk of wood at the end, and I felt like it was just easier to cut that off on the bandsaw as opposed to trying to sand it all off. So I put it on the bandsaw and cut those little pieces out. Then I did the profiling on the 2x72 and followed with a little hand sanding work. Used True Oil on the handle. I think I did 8 coats of True Oil. Let each coat dry for at least 2 hours, probably 2 to 6 hours, followed by some steel wool, and then reapply. And then I buffed that out with some pink no scratch on the buffer. Got it all sharpened up. And it's finished blade. Pretty happy with it. One of my more successful knife builds. And a really unique pattern. I'm sure that someone has done one of those before, but I haven't ever seen it. So I was really happy with the result. Well, I hope y'all have a great day, and we'll see you later.